Welcome back to Small College Conversations. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with the president and CEO of the NAIA, Jim Carr. Jim, thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, always fun to be with you, Anthony. Thanks.
So, as you sit here right now, it is late morning on June 25th, Thursday. I've only prefaced that as we're going to discuss the Protect College Sports Act, which is kind of changing on a very rapid basis, given all the other things going on in Washington that everybody probably is aware of. But you've been one who has been to DC, has been on Capitol Hill advocating for the changes you think benefit the association and its student athletes. At the top, what is the association's position on the legislation as it is written right now?
Yeah, I think I would describe it as I guess a technical term. We're okay with it. It's there's certainly some things that give us a little bit of pause, but I think in terms of what could be out there and what could have come out of it, I think it's as Senators Cruz and Cantwell have been saying, it's all about compromise, and you've got a lot of strong voices, certainly at the top of Division One and from various states and all the various Congress people. So I think, given what could be in the bill and what's actually been produced at this point, as you said, it's a moving target. It's going to continue to evolve, but I think we're pretty pleased with where it is.
As it's written right now, and you've sent a letter to your presidents earlier this week that we'll dive into in a moment. But what elements of the legislation, as it is currently written, are non-negotiable for the NAI moving forward?
Yeah, I'm not saying you meant it like this, but it sort of implies that we have some negotiating ability within all this, or we can just say, "Oh, we're not in if this stays in." So we know that's not necessarily the case. Really, nobody is. The NCAA is not in that same position either. But there are one thing that we wish had been stronger in there. It's a neutral position, but around student athletes as employees, and we understand from talking with both Senator Cruz and Senator Cantwell staffs on a frequent basis, that's just something they, especially Senator Cruz's staff, would love to have gotten something in there to say student athletes are not employees, but at the highest level, that's just something that's people have really strong feelings about. So that's one that we wish would be stronger in here. There are a few things that give us some pause or some concern. I think we'll probably get into the specifics around those, but so we'll continue to advocate to make sure that as things are put in place that are really intended at the highest level and to protect student athletes' rights, given the dollars that are involved at the highest levels of Division One, just making sure that those don't have trickle down effects on the NEI and really get our schools to a place where it becomes difficult to afford athletics. But I think we'll get into the specifics of a couple of those that we want to continue to work on. But for the most part, I think we're in a decent place.
Yeah, and you mentioned the eligibility piece, which we sat down probably 2.5 months ago at this point, post NAI convention, and you made the comment on eligibility that the chances for those who are not making money, especially those not making a lot of money, participating in college athletics, the chance of them being deemed employees is, as your quote was, not great. Given the neutral position, obviously it would be more beneficial to have a firm stance to say student athletes will not be employees under pretty much any circumstance, barring another legislative change. As your opinion on that change, and do you think the broader small college athletics, D2, D3, NAI, NJCAA, feel similarly that you can kind of live with a neutral as long as it doesn't go to student athletes are employees writ large across the board?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there really has just been a couple of NLRB opinions a number of years ago that sort of raised the question of student athletes who aren't being paid to play. It was an Ivy League case and one other where it was deemed that if you're getting equipment and meals and those kinds of things, that can be considered compensation, therefore employees. But that was it never got past the NLRB, and there hasn't been anything since then, since that 4 or 5 years ago, where that was an opinion of one person. So it sort of seems like the vast majority of people believe that at levels like the NAI, student athletes are not employees, and there would be some really a lot more downside of being deemed employees than upside.
And we'll get into kind of the letter you sent to your presidents had 3 main points of areas of the legislation that you had concerns about. The most notable given one of the pillars, it being one of the pillars of the legislation, is around eligibility. The model that is proposed very similarly aligns with the age-based model that Division One formally passed this week. Your concern was around the eligibility and limited antitrust conditions being tied to a single model. Your concerns with the model currently as written are what?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well, but in concept, what the way we understand the bill is that in order to get any trust protection, an association like ours would have to adopt the the rules that are in there, and the big ones are the 5 years of eligibility, kind of what the NCAA is referring to as an age, um, more of an age approach, one-time transfer, some of the recruiting and tampering rules, the things around NIL, and there's nothing in there that just causes us to say that would be terrible for the NAIA, but we do we would love to be able to retain the ability to set our own rules and what's best for us, and not just have to follow those that are set out by Congress. And especially when at times it's not all that clear exactly how the enforcement will work. It's one thing to say this is the rule, but as we all know, and we see from lots of lawsuits, the interpretation and the enforcement of those rules can be up for opinion, or people have different opinion on what that actually looks like. So I kind of, just in general, we'd love to be able to continue to create our own rules and enforce them. And the courts for decades have said associations like the NAI should be able to do that. And so that's what we'll keep trying to lobby around.
What are the elements that you would prefer to have more control over, given that, as far as I read it, the legislation allows for limited exceptions, but it does allow for student athletes to take longer periods of absence, as it terms it, as long as those rules are uniformly applied across the entire association.
Yeah. And you're talking specifically about the 5 year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, we're in the middle of a discussion with our membership, and we'll
Mhm.
likely have a vote in April. There are a few concepts that are being talked about, that you may in some ways have to earn that fifth season, either by being out of school for a certain period of time or hit certain academic metrics and things like that. And so if it would just take those things off the table for us, and we may just of our own choosing get to a very similar rule to what's in this legislation, but it would be nice for us to be able to have that conversation internally and decide what's best for our student athletes. And there's certainly some presidents who are still in the camp of 4 seasons, but yeah, so it's not as though we couldn't live with this rule. We could certainly live with it and deal with it, but we may choose something a little bit differently.
And by potentially opting in, assume this, like if this does get passed, that would give you, the association, limited antitrust protections. You have a greater understanding of what that means for the actual association than I do, having previously served as the general counsel for the NAI.
Right.
In the current landscape, what benefits does that actually provide the association?
Yeah, and I will have to say I'm not an antitrust lawyer, so we're in the process of getting some better legal advice than what I can give. But there, at least to date, we've not needed antitrust protection because the economics in the NAI are not such to where that typically is an avenue for people to sue us around. And so I think the little bit of a scary thing is that if we don't comply with this, and therefore we don't have any exemption around antitrust, and the court down the road would say that antitrust laws do apply to the NAI, then, well, obviously we would wish we had taken advantage of the protection. So that's just the what we're trying to guard against, is just understanding and making sure that first we don't need those protections, and if we don't, then we can decide on our own whether to opt in or not.
You mentioned the association's going through a year-long review. From a feeling standpoint, how does, a few months ago you had said that the association was a little over 50-50 across the entire coaches,
Right.
administrators, presidents, et cetera. Has the feeling around the association shifted at all meaningfully from that?
Yeah, I don't know that it's shifted in a definitive way, but my sense is that what looks like is coming in the next, either soon as into the summer. It may take till January, but we saw where Division One uh, essentially passed the rule that's in this legislation. And my understanding is it's likely that Division Two will do the same, and depending on what they can do in their governance structure, either late summer or in January. So I think that is likely to kind of send our vote in that direction, because there's at least some of the membership who think our coaches, we don't want to put our coaches at a competitive disadvantage if Division Two, especially Division One, probably not all that relevant. But if Division Two coaches are out able to promote 5 seasons and our coaches are only able to recruit under a 4 season model, that I think that'll send people more towards approving it.
This is something I know we've around what we've discussed previously, and this kind of ties into the right way to play campaign. This ties into the branding that the association has had, the more focused branding, I should say. From a focus mission standpoint, if you were to step back a little bit from this legislation specifically, the feeling around doing something as a reaction to what your competitors in Division Two would be doing, how do you kind of compare that with the desire to do what is best for the association? While those two things may be, in the same direction.
Yeah, and I was going to start with kind of where you just finished there. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think they're, it's a part of it's timing, but also I think our first and foremost our responsibility is to do what we think is right, to try to get it right. And sometimes if you can do that and be out in front and do it first, that's a home run. That's where we want to be. But I wouldn't like there were some people who are in our membership who really wanted us to go faster on this, but we to go faster, we would be doing it in a way that's not typical of how we work through things in the NAIA. It doesn't really give everybody a chance, or people who want a chance to weigh in. And so in this case, if we do it a little bit after the NCA, yeah, we'll get criticized some for reacting as opposed to getting out in front. But I do think the conversation and getting to the right outcome for us is more important.
If you were to kind of look at the other side of the coin, then if hypothetically Division Two doesn't get it done for the 27 convention and gets it done for the 28 convention, which was the initial plan after they pulled the legislation this past January, does that slower timing maybe change the psychology of it, or it's still you just kind of get the chance to be first, given the way your two legislative calendars work?
Yeah, I think it probably does change the psychology of it a little bit, but I feel pretty confident we will decide one way or another in April of 27. So if Division Two, continues to wait, I think we'll make a decision one way or another. I think I just mentioned the recruiting aspect because I know that's what certainly our coaches are thinking about. But I I think we'll be able to get to a place where we decide what's right for the NAI in 27. We know these days things are changing pretty rapidly, so the decision we make in 27, I guess, could be revisited if the landscape changes a ton. But I think our members are ready to decide one way or another in 27.
So we pivot to some of the other elements that you'd sent to your presidents that were an area of focus of concern from the current legislation. The other two, to start with one, was the fact that the NAI would be required to staff a national ombudsman position to support the needs and advocate for the student athletes within the NAI.
Right.
You are proposing a alternative model given the current expected financial impact that would have on the association. So before we jump into the finances of it, the alternative model you are thinking of, what does that look like?
Yeah, and it partly finances, but partly we think the model that we currently use works pretty well, and we don't necessarily need to centralize something like this. But I don't know what this says about me, and I probably shouldn't admit it publicly, but I had to go look up the word ombudsman. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant or what that would require. But essentially, it's requiring an association to create a system so that student athletes, and I'm sure their parents and others could come forward and file complaints around things that they either perceived or certainly some of them would be happening at the campus level. They don't like how their coach might be treating them, or their scholarship got pulled, whatever. We all can come up with a lot of different things that could come towards us. Some even worse than that, obviously things we see around mistreatment. But we're we're currently not equipped or staffed to implement a process that would do that. It's a little bit like kind of the Title IX kinds of charges on campus that now campuses are having to deal with, even though they're not very well equipped to do it. So it just raises a lot of questions for us about what would that staffing look like. I'm not. I think we're probably in a different place than maybe the people who are proposing this are in terms of just the volume and the number of things that would be coming our way. And we personally think our campuses are much better suited to deal with these things, and they already are. I mean, if they have a situation on a basketball team where the student athletes are saying the coach is mistreating them, the institution is taking that on. And so for us to be a third party that's coming in on top of that, we just have a lot of questions and concerns around how that would work and what the expectations would be.
Has the NAI considered whether that should be the position, or whether maybe not again this specific model, but a more national holistic look for the entire association to have a system in place, or everybody has a consistent system for standardization purposes?
Yeah, and we're always balancing kind of what what we do as an association, what the association is taking on, and then what our schools have autonomy to do. And we've talked enough to where that one of the hallmarks of NAI is institutional autonomy, and I think in most cases that's what our members prefer, and is what works better. But any time that there's this idea that student athletes are being mistreated and that institutions may have a conflict of interest or may not be able to really adjudicate those things very well, I think there's an argument to be made that there should be some third party for that. Now, student athletes, we see it at times, they have legal avenues and other things that they can do. But I don't, to get back to your question, for us, we certainly would be willing to have a dialogue around what is the right role. Are we currently doing it right or the best way possible, or should the NAIA be either required to or voluntarily do more to adjudicate some of these things? I think it's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, the fact that we got 17 minutes into the conversation without the word autonomy coming up is, I think, maybe a record for many of us. The but I to the question that is the next part of this, the financial implication. I understand the financial implication that you, the association, the concern you would have with saying, "Hey, we need a system, and here's what we think, and we're passing this off to you." That probably doesn't land very well with all of your membership, given the added financial pressure that brings. From the way the legislation is written, do you have a projection, a guess as to what the cost of that position, that system would be?
You know, I don't, because it's hard to really know what the expectation is. I mean, in theory, we could have one new staff member who is really fielding all those inquiries and doing a little bit of counseling and consulting and kind of working with each institution to get to a better resolution. Or it could be an entirely independent third party system where I don't think it's out of the question where we could get hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints on an annual basis, maybe not thousands, but certainly hundreds. And if the requirement was that we have to put a process in place that's something similar to what due process you would find in a legal system, that could require multiple employees, if not 10 to 15 employees to try to move through that system, and then just various technology and different things that could be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. If it, I think that some people would consider that extreme to think it would cost millions of dollars. But if it really did become a place where people came to file pretty much all kinds of complaints that are happening on the campus, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
One of the other elements of that you had concerns about was the governance structure changes that would need to be made to accommodate the appropriate threshold for student athlete involvement. The bill, as written, says no less than a third of the membership of basically governing boards has to be comprised of current student athletes or former student athletes who are not employees of the association, its member institutions, the conference. As a baseline to kind of go do some math here, the current percentage of committees that meet that criteria, and then what's maybe the percentage of committees or the percent makeup of student athletes on committees, and there's probably a range there, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's just, I mean, maybe it'd be easier for this
Yeah.
conversation just to talk about our four main councils. So, I mean, we got a lot of committees, coaches committees and
Mhm.
selection committees, all those kinds of things. But the four main councils, and they're the ones I think will be considered governing because they can make policy decisions. Are our council of presidents, our national administrative council, which governs competition, our council of faculty athletic reps from the compliance side and academic side, and then our council for student athletes, that all things health and safety of student athletes basically. And so the only one of those four that would meet this test currently is the council for student athletes. It has 40 to 50% of those members, depending on kind of how things stand, are made up of student athletes, current student athletes. And I don't know, probably none of the others would be in that recently graduated, but the others typically just have one student athlete of a council from anywhere from 20 to 40 at the NAC. So it would, for those, obviously we'd have a new mix, and we'd have to do a lot of shakeup to make that happen. I guess I want to start by saying more voice for the student athlete. I'm all in favor of that. So if we can add student athletes to a number of our groups and or recent graduates who were student athletes, I think the challenge in some of these committees come with, and I'll just use the National Administrative Council. The things they're making decisions on are very specific to how we qualify and how our postseason competition works, and just a lot of kind of inside baseball mechanics of all that kind of stuff. And so, putting 30% of that group as current or former student athletes seems a little heavy to me. But if it's a requirement, we'll figure out how to do it. I do like the fact that it doesn't have to be all current student athletes, just because the turnover that would happen from year to year with pretty much with all our councils. It takes a year or two to really kind of get up to speed and understand how things are working. So it would just be a big change for us. And I would also put this a little bit under the camp of nobody really likes to be told what they have to do. So we would have a certain makeup that we'd have to hit every year, but we certainly could deal with it. It would just be a huge change for us.
The change you are advocating for is maybe twofold: reducing that one-third threshold and focusing this provision to the committees, the councils, the governing boards, where student athlete participation is most relevant. Out of those four, that would obviously be the Council of Student Athletes, given that it already meets said provision. Are there certain, I guess, of the four, if we were to play this out, of the four, which of those four, if any besides the one that does, should apply that hypothetically reduced threshold?
Well, our council for student athletes works well as it is, and it meets it. So of the other three, um, I would say more voice on all three of them, but I wouldn't, if I could set it up just the way I want to set it up, we would not get to the 30%. I think with the council of presidents, they're working with making a lot of financial decisions, and just decisions that are for the good of our campuses and our members. And I just think, folks in the category that we're talking about, or the group that we would have to come in at 30%, would have very limited experience with all of those things. And probably would say a similar thing, different types of decisions that the CFAR and the NAC are making, but takes some more experience in those areas is helpful for those bodies. So I would say maybe if we could somehow use this as a way to grow the voice of the student athlete, but not have to get to the 30% is where I would be.
And do you think there would be value in addition to having more student athlete representation within each of those bodies, the way I believe it's currently written is that the former student athletes, obviously, as I mentioned, can't work for the association, conferences, or schools, and they also have to have graduated within the last 10 years, I believe, is the
Right.
threshold.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If that last part was changed, where basically that would open up the opportunity to have former student athletes be basically independent members, which a number of other committees, maybe on the NCAA side, have brought in that have expertise in certain areas. Is that an area where that could be a benefit for the association?
I think so. I mean, I don't know how my bosses on the council of presidents would feel, but if we had um, some diverse experience of successful business people and people who are um, successful in other industries, I think that would bring some nice new ways of thinking to our board, and so I would be all for that. And I think that's I hesitate to say this a little bit, but I think with the USOPC groups that are where they require former athlete experience, I don't think it's limited to within the last 10 years. So I think that's worked pretty well for the USOPC.
One of the provisions I wanted to ask you about that you didn't mention in your letter to your presidents earlier this week was around the commission for the future of college athletics that this bill would put together, which I think is at last count would be 22 people appointed by a number of different committees. There is no guaranteed spot for somebody within small college athletics, period. There's not really a criteria of who those people are, but they are just picked by different Senate or congressional groups. Is that a concern for you?
It is, and we've expressed that of course we would love to be specific to the NAIA, but I think certainly the voice of those outside of Division One is important, and so yeah, we're talking with the Cruz and Cantwell staffs about the potential to add something in there around that. I did see something where I don't know if it's an official amendment, but there was some reporting that two spots for HBCUs
Mhm.
might be part of that group. But yeah, I would I would love to see maybe one from Division Two, one from Division Three, and one from NAI, or at least one maybe that's rotated among those groups. 'Cause I do, and I would think well those two staff seem receptive to it, and they've really appreciated the information we've been able to provide about those outside of Division One. So I think they get that that's important. Whether they can get it in as an amendment, I'm not sure.
And then what are your conversations like with those two staffs, other Senate staffs that you have a relationship with, and then maybe on the other side of the congressional body, the members in Congress, while this bill has not reached that part yet, if for it to pass, it does need to reach that part.
Yeah, we were talking with a lot of people on the House side around the SCORE Act. So
Mhm.
we've had a lot of discussions last year, Nap Chesney, Salee, and I have, and it I don't know of any that I can point to that haven't been really positive and very appreciative of us being willing to take the time and come up to DC and just try to educate them around um, what's going on outside of Division One. They're all smart people, so when you start talking about the fact that there's 95% of the schools are outside of at least the highest level Division One, but it's almost like a light bulb goes off a little bit because they once they start thinking about it, they're like, oh, of course there are, but it just didn't seem like it was top of mind for a lot of people as all these conversations were playing out, and for reasons that make some sense. I mean, all the media coverage was around, the spiraling cost of Division One and just all the things that are happening over there. So they've just been really, really positive, and but I don't want to be um, either overconfident or just kind of resting on our laurels. I mean, it wouldn't take long for us to be kind of out of sight, out of mind. So we want to continue to champion that. And I think this is fair to say. Division Two and Division Three, their leaders aren't really in a position to advocate a whole lot because the NCAA's kind of in unison putting forward messaging and things that they want to see happen. And that's mostly driven by the Power Four conferences. So I think it's important for us in general. And our friends at the NJCA are very active as well. We've been partnering with them and doing some things. So we're going to continue to do that. And I really appreciate the fact that um, people on both the House and Senate side are willing to visit with us.
You mentioned the Division Two and the Division Three folks. That was where my next question was going. Given that fact that they're tied to the rest of the NCAA and Division One, the Power Four, who have more lobbying power, if we could put it that way. Have you been in contact with D2, D3 leaders about the changes that you are advocating for, whether that's to understand their position on them, maybe tag them in on certain relationships, whatever that may be?
We really haven't. I've we're just going to NACTA, you run into all kinds of Division two and Division three ADs and folks like that. But we really haven't specifically around that. We have talked with one of their lobbyists, but it's an NCAA lobbyist, not specific to Division two and Division three. But no, we haven't any specific conversations around kind of. I guess I don't want to be presumptuous and go to them and make it act like we're speaking for them, because we're not. But yeah, it's probably overdue. We need to have some conversation around this.
And then if we can step back, if I can put you in the hot seat a little bit, as I
Okay.
tend to do with these conversations a little bit. As the conversations you are having with people in DC, you know, it just got through committee last week. There's a limited number of actual Senate working days till the end of this session, on top of the fact that there are political challenges given A, everything else going on in the world and that the Senate is focusing on, and B, yesterday, the administration is supposed to sign a bipartisan housing bill and then put the kibosh on that for other political reasons. What is your level of optimism around this bill getting to the president's desk, if we can set that as the marker?
If the question is my level of optimism, I would say it's very low. I don't. I think. I mean, we were told by folks who know a lot more about this than I do, several months ago, that the chances of something getting passed, and this was back when they were considering the SCORE Act, but something getting passed in this area before the midterms is not likely. And now, as I read about kind of I can't remember how many legislative days are remaining, but there's a bunch of breaks in between now and the end of August. So again, partly relying on people who know more about this than I do, that I think the chances of this getting passed are 10 to 20% probably.
And then as you think maybe more broadly about the involvement of the federal government in college athletics, from your seat, how involved will you continue to be with those individuals? Does this issue kind of fall by the wayside? That, I guess, in your opinion, informed, you're talking to more people in DC than I am, for sure. What comes after, hypothetically, if this does not get passed?
My understanding is that it'll be almost like starting over. That I don't think the desire, especially from the NCAA's perspective and from a lot of people who are on the Hill and support institutions that are in Division one, I think there's a lot of appetite to help change the system. So my assumption is that it'll just kind of all restart, and may take components of either the SCORE Act or the Protect College Sports Act, but I think it'll be pretty much starting from scratch in terms of trying to get people to join the effort.
Jim, as always, I appreciate the insights. I appreciate the perspective as we try to just figure out what is coming next with the Protect College Sports Act and the federal government's involvement in college athletics.
It's a tough task trying to figure out what's going to happen next, but we'll keep at it.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Anthony.